It's going.
Okay, are you gonna get up this way?
Nope, I'm gonna stay over here. Jeez,
Alright.
I think I am. We'll have an outtakes afterwards to make her laugh. Okay, everyone needs to move slightly to the
Why don't we just move
left, to the left.
Maybe. Which left? Our
Because
left?
I'm already back
Our
here.
left.
Is it too far away? Can we get closer? I think it's probably good. I'll just move my thingy.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Lou. You can go up. It'll be easier.
Do any of the vending machines on campus take debit cards?
Debit?
That'd be all.
Vending machines?
Yeah. One at my high school did. It was the Dutchman.
Oh, okay. I was like, is there some study session or something that we're...
We're a study session. We're very small.
Who's the professor?
Hey,
Our
that's
professor's
fine.
online.
Oh. Hello, professor.
Oh, why did we move again?
What do you mean? What's the matter? I'll get it. So I'm in the middle, so then I'll...
Good thing it's been a minute and 20 seconds so far.
We got this.
We should have bloopers. We will.
That right
yes.
there is perfection. I'm back. All right, we're on in 3, 2. Welcome to the Vicki Anderson Show. Today we will be discussing. Stop it. Okay. Today we will be discussing breaking down barriers. I have brought all 4 of us together because we have studied in-depth articles pertaining to breaking down barriers. All of our articles discuss how people perceive languages across cultural barriers and differences. Our talk tonight will explore the different challenges we come across due to cultural difference meanings of language, speaking and receiving, and seek to shed light. I do that every time because I think it should be shed. Okay, and seek to shed light on misperceptions. First, we're going to introduce ourselves and our articles. We will start with our lovely person on the left.
Hi, my name is Louisa Mail, and I read the article A Lexical Phrase Grammar for ESL by James R. Nattinger. This article discusses how prefabricated speech routines and language behavior affect our ability to understand in terms of pragmatics and according to context and social situations, how these different lexical phrases change, which we will discuss further once our other lovely ladies have introduced themselves.
Well, my name is Renee Williams, and I read an article entitled Semantic Constructivity in ESL Reading Comprehension. This article was written by Carl Perkins. If you don't know him, you should get to know him. Great guy. And it discusses second language learners' ability to identify inferences, which is memories that are triggered in your brain when you read the words, and retain knowledge from reading a text. They performed the same study they did on Language 1 learners and compared the results. It was found that Language 2 learners incorrectly drew inferences more than the primary language learners.
I'm Jalen Woolen, and my article was titled Components of Evaluative Reactions to Varieties of Irish Accents, and it was by Masterson, Mullins, and Mulville Hill. Now, these guys were Irish, of course, and they studied how people of different linguistic backgrounds react and judge others by their different Irish accents. And they found that the accent associated with lower class causes people to think of the speaker as uneducated and unsuccessful. And also the accent associated with higher class produced the effect of success and high education.
Interesting.
Excellent. Now to you.
Alright, I'm Samantha Lantizer. I read an article entitled What's in a Name? Social Labeling by Sally McConnell Janet. So it's about social labeling. It discusses the names we call ourselves, our friends, and each other. The labels that we invent don't only assign an attribute to a person. They can either be incorrect or correct, but all labels we give each other affect that person's identity. And in different cultures, different societies, and then depending on gender, labels can have far-reaching implications. So simply put, names have power. Sorry, that was quiet.
Well said. Well said. And now I would just love to get to know you and why these articles were interesting to you. So why don't we go back to you, Sam?
Alright, well, we all label each other every day, so you can't escape it. We call each other by our names. We use terms like guys or dudes, which can have a gender but don't always have a gender. It's a daily phenomenon that we don't usually pay much attention to, but it is very important. Titles like Mr., Miss, Doctor, Uncle, Aunt, etc. all fit under this umbrella of social labeling. So I found it interesting because we all do it. You can't escape it. And it does affect how people perceive you and then how that person perceives themselves. And so for something we do every day without thinking much about it, it does cause, it makes ripples, and so it causes lots of...
That's interesting because yours is all about how you talk to people and how the perception of how you name them, and hers is all about the speech itself and how it's spoken. So yours is like the name and hers is the form in a way.
Jalen, why don't you enlighten us on what caught your fancy with your Irish article?
Well, I love accents, but that's not really pertinent.
It could be.
I was aware that inadequate grammar usage and poor sentence structure cause others to think less of someone, but when dealing with accents and dialects, I never made the same connection. British actress Michelle Dockery from Downton Abbey, she has an Essex accent, which is related to the working class in Britain. She was able to change her accent while on screen to sound like the upper class British, and this helps her get acting jobs. Also, British actor Hugh Laurie, he is able to turn off his accent when filming episodes from the TV series House. So this helps in their career and opens up their credibility a lot.
Great.
I was always interested about accent coaches on television.
Yes.
I never knew there was such a thing.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
They have names in the credits. It's pretty neat.
Nice.
Yeah, because they, like for Hugh Laurie, for example, when they need to change their accents, sometimes they're not fully aware of what they're saying that could be wrong. They can't hear it quite because they weren't babies when they learned it. So they need someone to hear it for them and kind of correct them as they go and practice their lines with them.
So kind of like in choir when your instructor can hear you hitting the wrong note, but you think you're hitting it right.
Precisely.
Yes.
Learning a new accent is like learning how to sing and pronounce the words correctly. It's like a different language almost.
Yeah. And what's also interesting is that when you sing, it's like your accent isn't there because everyone sings in the same
Yeah.
accent.
It's bizarre.
It is bizarre.
Interesting.
Tangent.
More on that later. Next episode. Now, I find it very interesting with the prior knowledge that you have and that they can just turn off their accents because I think that would be pretty difficult. But my article was very interesting to me because I would love to be an ESL teacher, first of all, but that's beside the point. And second of all, it demonstrated the importance of a working knowledge of the language to understand the text. So, in other words, even if you understand what each word is defined as, it could still be difficult to understand the whole meaning of the text if you don't have prior knowledge to look back at. That's why the L1 children, or the ones that it was in their primary language, were able to understand the text better because they could go back in their memory bank and use that to connect that with what they were reading. But unfortunately, ESL readers don't have that, so we need to be aware of that when we're teaching them. And perhaps that pertains to lexical phrases for ESL students.
It does, in many ways, I believe. My article, I would also like to be an ESL teacher, and my article spoke about, as I discussed, lexical phrases and how a two or more words are a building block of meaning and can stand alone as meaning. So it's not just learning the vocabulary word of each word, it's learning the phrase itself. So my article took this a step further and talked about how it's not only knowing the phrase, but knowing how to use the phrase. And it talked a lot about cliches, idioms, and all of these phrases that we use every day, but we're not really aware, kind of like we talked about with the accents. We're not aware that we're using them, and we're not aware that it's part of our language and part of our culture. But someone else coming in, like the choir director, would not be able to hear, or would be able to hear, the difference. So they call this an oral formula, and how different, so an oral formula of an idiom is going to be different than the oral formula of a cliche, and how subconsciously or consciously a student learning English would need to learn the different oral formulas, but there's so many different ways to have a formula, just like we have different, what are they called? Whenever a verb doesn't follow the grammar,
Uses?
right? Uses, but
Tenses?
tenses,
Oh, when they don't follow the...
yeah, exceptions to the rule. So there's so many different exceptions to the rule, we might as well just learn them. Anyway, it's extensive. And so, relating back to your article, the comprehension, they don't have anything to go back on because they weren't given all that extra building blocks, foundation from their childhood. So they're learning so much more. We're learning as we go. There are things we learn every day as we go. But they have to learn so much more to catch up with us because we can go back and say, well, I heard this used in this context, so it probably means this. Well, they're learning it in a different, brand new context at the beginning.
Excellent. Well, I think that we would love to hear from Jalen about why her article relates to linguistics.
I thought this article related to linguistics because it deals with different dialects in the English language, of course. And for each dialect, the researchers had people with linguistic backgrounds and educations to rate each accent when they heard it on various semantic differential scales. And some of the things they rated were vocabulary, fluency, education, success, friendliness, and even honesty. So just going off of how someone talks, you're judging them on how honest you think they are.
Incredible. Rough.
So I think a lot of that has to do with how we approach them or entitle them. So
Yeah. The article that I read deals with semantics and with pragmatics, and so it deals with word meaning and even the denotation versus the connotation of the words. And so with pragmatics, it deals with the context, and so different names people are calling you in different contexts. Like if someone called you a woman, it depends on the person, and then in what context, and then what even the tone that they put on it. It could be a compliment, it could be just referring to your gender, or it could be be derogatory based on who's saying that, the context and everything. It's really quite interesting.
And so interesting, again, with the ESL students that we come across, sometimes it's interesting how their accents, we can look at them differently. So if a student comes from, say, France, and they have this, or Norway, I went to a school with a lot of people from Norway, and they had this cool European accent, but then we had the Vietnamese people, and we're like, oh, the Vietnamese, because it's all a lot more tonal, and it kind of, it hurt our ears in a different way. So while the Norwegian accent was all romantic, the Vietnamese was harsher. And so we looked down more on the Vietnamese, and also the Vietnamese were generally less good at English. So then we started naming them derogatorily or better according to where their accent was from. So Norski. Oh, there's a Norski, it was like a good thing. And then the Vietnamese, we just didn't even talk about them.
So that deals with both Jalen's article and my article too. So
Exactly.
accents.
Disclaimer, we love Vietnamese people.
And it's kind of like, isn't French called the language of love?
Right, exactly. So if you have a French accent, oh my goodness, it's lovely.
How can you not love them?
How can you not love that?
Well, my article relates to the world of linguistics because with the semantics in Sam's article, semantic constructivity to these second language learners is actually more important than syntactic structure. So we can see that there's 4 skills necessary for inferencing and semantic constructivity, which is prior knowledge, logical skills, systematic integration, and active processing. So all these things you have to take into account when you're trying to teach ESL students about how to read text and how to understand it.
Don't you think that maybe the Norwegians had an easier time learning English than the Vietnamese because their culture was also more similar?
Yeah,
So
their
then-
prior knowledge.
Their prior knowledge, exactly. So then the things that we would talk about in an American text would be more similar than what the Vietnamese or even the Chinese students and the Japanese would.
Cultures, the ethnic differences definitely produce variance in the tasks, and they even mentioned that in my article.
Wow, I could have written your article.
Could
have.
Perhaps you are Kyle Perkins.
Maybe.
Moonlight has.
So,
It's my turn. How does
your article relate to the world of linguistics, Louisa?
it? Well, first of all, the word lexical is in the title, and that's very linguistic. I'd like to point out that it's interesting how everything is so set up, how they try to form a system, and I think that linguistics itself is very trying to tease away, as our professor Vicki Anderson says, to find the system, but at the same time, while you're teasing, you find all these different exceptions. So the article itself is just chock full of how you have polywords, so words that you have more than one word to form a word. So like kick the deadpan, that's actually one meaning. And then you have phrasal constraints and deictic locutions and sentence builder and situational utterances, things you only say in a certain situation. So, cold enough for you. What does that mean? It depends on the context. And then verbatim text, so things that we have to say word for word or else they don't have the same meaning. So I think that the whole idea that it depends not only on what is said, but where the whole context just adds so much to the linguistic idea that yes, these are the patterns we look for, but it's not always going to be like this.
Excellent. So a lot of times the patterns are connected with the names because you get into the pattern calling that person the same thing.
And then it becomes a stereotype.
Exactly. So stereotypes definitely relate to the world of English and also Jalen's article and some language-related professions. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how your article relates to any professions or
It
the world of English.
Mine can relate to any profession really, because especially if you're in a position of power, you don't want to make the mistake of like assuming someone's gender based on their title, or it comes into the whole situation where you start saying he, she, or his, her, and how. So, in any position of power, you need to be careful about what you call people, or what you're heard calling people when you don't think people are listening. It's really a tricky situation, but
So do you think that the way that even like someone who's inferior approaches or what's the word that means that how they address that person
Yeah.
can affect getting jobs or their job in the
That's
work.
the article I read. There was an entire section on how you address people, and there was a section about this one woman who, when she got promoted, she started changing the way she addressed her former superiors, and then how she addressed her then inferiors, and then how she had her inferiors addressing her. And so it deals with familiarity and how you use that, and how sometimes familiarity, can be using your full name or it can be using a nickname. It's all really, I don't know, it's interesting. And it's
Very interesting.
all deals with context. And so how you address someone can be used for or against you.
Or like when your parents are mad at you, they use your full name.
Truth.
Yes.
Truth.
My
That's
brother
true.
uses my full name. when
All
he's mad.
5 names.
So, do they ever use your full name in an accent?
I don't know. I guess there's
No, never had that.
no, haven't come across that.
How do these accents relate to the world of English and language-related professions, Jalen?
It shows, I guess, how people talk affects how people think of them, of course. And the information could be used to help people see how they're judged and how other people judge people. And that could help reverse the problem. And also, like Lou talked about, the accent coaches, that kind of, like, I didn't know that was a profession, and that'll bring to light more propaganda for that career, I guess.
So your article is almost like Pygmalion and how, Eliza Doolittle.
Yes, exactly. I love My Fair Lady.
Yes.
Exactly.
Exactly. That's true. I didn't even think of that. I should have known.
Yeah. So, how does your article relate to the world of English and language-related professions?
Well, from an aspiring ESL teacher's perspective, I remember one time, happened to be in Hong Kong teaching English to some young students, and
We'll have to have a segment on that later.
in a few episodes. And we were definitely by far the best English speakers there. And
We're in China.
we were in China, and we came across a teacher who had lived for 2 years in Canada, and we were so surrounded by people who did not know English as well as we did. So we were really altering what we were saying so that it was more understandable, and even changing some of these lexical patterns or omitting them completely so that we would be understood. And I remember we talked to Tim. His name was Mr. Tim Tam, and we were waiting for our person to come get us so we could go out to eat. And he said, well, let me just give her a buzz. And our jaws all just hit the floor because we had only talked to him for 2 minutes at that point. And at that moment, we were like, here's a guy we can relax and just speak normally to, because he knew that phrase. And the mistake we made, first of all, was that just because he knew that phrase doesn't mean he would know a lot of them. At the same time, as far as our perception went, it gave him a lot more clout in our eyes as someone that we could go to communicate more easily. So, from a professional's perspective, it's a good thing to have to be able to use lexical phrases in other people's languages, but at the same time, if you use them too often or you use them poorly, people will start to think that you're just trying to impress them. But Tim Tam did a great job.
Great. Would have loved to meet him.
You would have.
All right. Well, in my article, it actually directly pertains to quite a few professions because there's classroom teachers that are going to have ESL students, material writers, even maybe you're writing a screenplay, you might have to watch out for different semantic constructivity that you might not even think of. Other things are ESL specialists and even ESL test constructors have to think about that if they're writing the TOEFL or things like that, that they might have to make sure that they're looking at what semantic constructivity that they're including in the text. So very few ESL reading text acknowledge the existence of this, so it's definitely something that needs to become more known, and kind of people need to realize that they need to take this into account, and that these readers don't have the prior knowledge that a speaker, an English native speaker, would have.
You know, may I?
Yes, you may.
I was in a writing class once, and we actually talked about this a little bit not from a non-native English speaker's perspective, but just from when you're writing a poem or any sort of thing. But the poem was specifically what we were talking about. Different words have different shadows of meaning to different people.
Mm-hmm.
So you can say something like, you know, the tree fell. And the tree fell might mean it hitting the ground for someone, while for someone else it might mean the tree fell on their favorite dog. So it has a much more personal meaning for the second person than the first.
Yes.
I couldn't come up with a better.
Their prior knowledge
Their
definitely
prior knowledge definitely
affects
affected how they understood it and read it, and which heartstrings it pulled even.
Yeah. Even when you're writing speeches or things like that, you're going to say things that cue people's brains into different things.
Exactly.
And then they'll be off on a bunny trail when you're trying to make a different point. So definitely have to select your words wisely.
And my history teacher talked about this in high school, that crusades, like Bush, when he was addressing the nation after the 9/11 attacks, he said we need to start a crusade or something along the lines. He used the word crusade, and that freaked out
Many people.
Yeah, because back in Iraq and Iran, crusade to them is slaughtering and religious war, and to us, he wasn't using it in the same context, really, like kind of fighting, but not to the extreme that Iraq and Iran held it to.
Right.
So
Professor Jerkin brought that up earlier this year in the history of Old Testament and history and lit of the Old Testament class that I'm in. That, you know, he was over in Turkey, and so in Turkey it means something completely different than in the United States, because they still, the Crusades, the like ones that we think of historically, that's still fresh in their mind, but over in America we don't really think about.
It's not even part of our history.
No, we didn't exist back then.
Exactly.
So we think, you know, of more the term crusades, we don't think of the proper noun crusades. So it has a different connotation in different cultures.
Exactly.
Well, I'm so glad that you guys could join me tonight to break down some language barriers. And that's all for tonight on the Vicki Anderson Show.
That should be long enough.
Really
How long
horrible.
is
It's
What?
like when the
It wasn't
computer
so-
went
it wasn't
black,
recorded.
stopped.
Oh my gosh.
No, it's 28.
Oh my gosh, we're wonderful.
Look at us.
It's supposed to be how long?
20.